Romans chapter 1 this morning, if you'll find that passage. And I'm sure that probably in Baptist churches all over the country this morning, this is probably a text a lot of preachers will take or something similar. I had not planned on preaching from this text, but in light of this past week and the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, I believe it's a message that we need to hear. And so Romans chapter number 1, and try to give you a little bit of perspective on what is going on in our country. I hope that our teenagers especially will listen this morning. I don't know if they teach civics in school, government in school anymore. I don't know if kids anymore even know that there's 3 branches of government and separation of powers and all that kind of thing. But I hope that you will listen. And for some of you this morning, some of the things I may say may be tough, but it will be true. Okay? And Romans chapter number 1, have several guests visiting with us this morning. Thank you so much for being here. We're honored that you're here. We really are. And thank you so much for coming. Romans chapter number 1. Let me just read the passage of Scripture and then I'll get started. Verse number 18 down through verse number 32. You know this passage of Scripture. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. I believe that phrase, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, I believe that word hold, I believe it actually means to suppress it, to hold it down, Verse 19, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and 4-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another. Men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. Boy, He puts that in bad company, doesn't He? Without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. I was only 4 years old in 1973 when the Supreme Court handed down Roe versus Wade, which legalized abortion in America. Of course, I wasn't aware of anything then. I didn't know what abortion was. I didn't even know we had a Supreme Court when I was 4. Since Roe versus Wade, our nation has murdered over 55 million babies under the name of abortion. Now, I call abortion murder because the Bible defines life as beginning at conception. There is not a single political candidate of either party, there is no national figure that would call it murder. And the reason why is because every murder has to have a murderer. So if abortion is murder, then the mother, the father, the judge, the doctor are all complicit in the crime. So for 40 years, the media has told America that a woman has a right to choose what to do with her body. That thing inside of her is just a fetus. Woman's right to choose, but abortion is still murder. Because what the court is unable to do is change the truth. They can decree that murder is not murder, but they cannot change when life begins. No matter how imperialistic a court becomes, they can't overrule God's law. Every Republican, and most of you would probably be Republican or independent, I guess, I don't know, but every Republican politician's position will be that he is pro-life. However, he does not want abortion to be a political issue. He'd rather talk about the economy than abortion. There will never be a push to overturn Roe versus Wade, because he does not believe that abortion is murder. To call it murder is too strong. It is too divisive. But to not call it murder is to meet the abortionist halfway. It is to take a neutered stance, is what it is to do. Now this week, the Supreme Court has handed down 3 decisions, 2 very landmark decisions. The first was upholding the health care law, otherwise known as Obamacare. The case had to do with federal subsidies where there are no state exchanges. Whatever, huge victory for Democrats, socialists, progressives. Obamacare is here to stay. All right, fine. The second case was, of course, over same-sex marriage. In what will be the Roe versus Wade of this generation, the federal court decreed that same-sex marriage is protected under the Constitution. Now, in the decision, they said 2 things. First, that 6,000 years of defining marriage as between a man and a woman must now be changed to include a man with a man or a woman with a woman. The second thing that they decided is that individual states do not have the right to decide that for themselves. 5-4 ruling, they decreed that the 14th Amendment requires states to issue marriage license for same-sex couples and to recognize such marriages that are issued by other states. Now, young people, a civics lesson. And I want you to think about this morning. All right? Before this past week, gay marriage was legal in 37 states already. All right? Now, here's what I want you to think. In 3 of those, of 37, it was legalized by popular vote. That means that somebody put it on the ballot, and when people went to vote in November on this ballot, that was one of the things to vote on. And of 37 states, only 3 of them, the people of the state voted for it. In 8 of those states, it was imposed by the state legislature. So in Florida, they would get together in Tallahassee, and our state representatives would get together, and they would vote, and they would pass that. In 26 of the states, it was imposed by a federal court. Even in the state of California, the citizens went to the ballot and voted against same-sex marriage. 3 judges stepped in and said, no, that's unconstitutional, and they imposed it against the will of the people. Voters in 31 states have passed state legislatures defining a marriage as between a man and a woman. And all of those votes have been overturned by the Supreme Court. Now that is what you call judicial activism. All right? That is an imperial court. 5 judges, 2 of which have already officiated at same-sex marriages. 5 judges has redefined the most foundational structure of our society. They have imposed upon our nation a law that a majority of states have already voted against. And when you make marriage to include gay marriage, it makes it a genderless institution. It makes it more about the desires of adults than the needs of children. It means that fathers and mothers are now interchangeable. Now, on the political side, all the politicians and presidential candidates, they have come out with their statements. Most of the statements were, we disagree with what the court decided, it's the law of the land, let's all get along. That's kind of the gist of most of their statements. Jeb Bush, he said, I believe the court got it wrong, but he urged respect for all couples, including those making lifetime commitments. Marco Rubio, he said, we live in a republic, we must abide by the law. Now we focus on protecting the First Amendment rights of religious institutions. Neither Bush or Rubio would support a constitutional amendment to reverse the court's ruling. Scott Walker, he would push for a constitutional amendment to allow states to continue prohibiting same-sex marriages. Lindsey Graham, he said the Supreme Court has ruled that state bans on gay marriage are unconstitutional. I will respect the court's decision. Bobby Jindal, I don't know, I guess he's running, he said the Supreme Court is completely out of control, making laws on their own, has become a public opinion poll instead of a judicial body. He said, if we want to save money, let's just get rid of the court. I don't know how we would do that. Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz said that he would submit a constitutional amendment to allow states to define marriage. He also said that the Constitution gives the Congress power to strip the courts of jurisdiction and that they should pass a law stripping the courts of their rights to define what marriage is. He also said that Supreme Court judges should be subject to retention elections, meaning they could be voted back out of office if they started abusing their power. Now, yeah, I like that too. Okay, I like that too. It never happened. Okay, but I like it. Okay, it might be enough to get my vote, but no, it's not going to happen. You see, just like abortion and Obamacare, once their foot is in the door, it's there to stay. You'll never reverse abortion. I don't believe that you'll ever reverse same-sex marriage. You have to take another look at a guy that's willing to take the fight on, all right? Would like to have a fighter, all right? But here's several thoughts for you. And then I'm going to preach this morning on when God abandons a nation. Very encouraging message to this one, all right? But a couple of thoughts. The first thought for us moving forward is that it doesn't stop here. And by that I mean, do not believe that the liberal, God-hating, Christian-hating, Bible-hating pagans have won this battle and they're done. Gay marriage is perverse, but that is not the end of their perversion. Already we are seeing the national conversation change from gays and lesbians to transgenders. You see, the push is now on to accept transgender, just like the push has been on to accept sodomy. Politico.com has already published an article on Friday, advocating for legalizing polygamy on the same grounds they advocated legalizing same-sex marriage. They've got a point, by the way. They've got a point. And perhaps the next step will be lowering the age of consent for children so pedophilia can kind of creep in a little bit more. You say that'll never happen. I know. 40 years ago, you'd have never said that same-sex marriage would be legalized in America. The second thought is that the next stage of their battle will be forcing religious organizations to accept, perform, and allow for gay couples in their organization. I mean, you and I know. Do not think that the gay agenda is okay with churches not recognizing them. You see, this was not a battle for what they think is right. No, this was a battle against God, and you represent God. There have already been businesses in the United States that have been sued for not giving service to a gay wedding. A wedding chapel wouldn't rent their facilities to a gay couple, and a baker wouldn't bake a cake for a gay wedding, and a florist wouldn't provide flowers for a gay wedding, and our government has sued them for holding to their religious convictions. Now guys, listen. It's not that the baker wouldn't bake a cake for a gay person. Homosexual can walk in and buy a cake, but I'm not going to bake a cake for that wedding. I don't condone that. I'm not going to be a part of that. And the government is already sued. Now, I don't believe that they will come after churches tomorrow, but I do believe they will come after churches eventually. First, they will go after organizations like Catholic hospitals and nonprofit charities. Then there would be a loud push to revoke tax-exempt status, 501c3, tax-exempt status from churches. That's fine. One day it will be a hate crime to refuse to marry them, to refuse to hire them, to refuse to give them leadership in your church. You see, civics lessons, and I'm going to preach, all right? But you need to hear this. You need to hear this, all right? Because you're not going to hear this on MSNBC. I'm going to tell you the truth this morning, all right? You see, the fight was not about equal rights for gays. That's not what the fight is about. The fight is to destroy the Constitution so that Marxism can take over this country. That's what the fight is about. The American thinker, a guy named Simpson, here's what he wrote, and I want to read this to you, and this is the only thing that I'll read. Here's what he said. He said, the left uses rights agendas to wrap itself in the mantle of righteousness and seize the moral high ground, tactically putting us on the defense in the process. But they couldn't care less about the actual issue except in its ability to facilitate their path to power. The agenda is never the agenda for the left. This is especially true for gay marriage. Homosexual marriage is a Trojan horse. The true agenda is to establish the primacy of homosexual rights over the First Amendment's guarantee of the free exercise of religion. Our nation was founded on this principle, and the gay marriage movement seeks to destroy it. What is less known is that these gay couples are frequently part of the movement. They deliberately seek out businesses known for their Christian owners. They deliberately demand a service they know in advance will be refused. When the inevitable happens, they use it as a pretext to destroy the business and savage its owners. Doesn't it amaze you how quickly legal groups immediately materialize to assist in the attack? The fact that they got unexpected pushback through a spontaneous crowd-sourcing campaign to support one pizza shop will not dissuade them from future efforts. If gay marriage is adopted, this is before the court decided, their current bullying behavior will look like child's play compared to what's coming. This is a highly organized nationwide campaign of vilification against Christians. But even Christians are not the ultimate target. If the First Amendment can be challenged this way, if a certain group's rights can trump the U.S. Constitution, if the Supreme Court can actually issue an edict making it so, then the entire Constitution has become meaningless. This is the left's true agenda, and it always has been. This is the cultural Marxist endgame. The issue is not the issue. The issue for them has always been destroying our country to impose socialism with them in charge. In order to do that, they have to strip America of its culture, its tradition, and most importantly, the most important law of the land, the U.S. Constitution. That is true. That's true. Now, we've never faced persecution in America. And we don't have a martyr's complex. But if Jesus tarries, I believe that's where we're headed. I believe that your kids' America is going to look a whole lot different than the America that you grow up in. And that persecution, watch this, will make us smaller, but it will make us stronger. Persecution will always thin the ranks, and that will be a good thing. Our churches are so full of members who are sympathetic to the world, who would never pay a price for their faith. They are not part of the solution, they are part of the problem. And God often uses persecution to purge the church so that His power may finally flow through it. I am a conscientious dissenter. Just because something is legal doesn't make it moral and doesn't make it right. I have signed a national petition. 1,700 pastors around the country have signed it that says I will not comply with that law. I don't have a false sense of bravado, but I am willing to lose everything, including my freedom, but I will not submit to an unconstitutional, unbiblical demand. I will never perform a same-sex marriage. Oh, you say amen. That's the price I may have to pay. But when your employer says to be employed at this place of business, you cannot be a member of an organization that goes against same-sex marriage, and it's your job or your church, then what are you going to do? Now, Romans chapter number 1 is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago when it was written. The passage is about the judgment of God upon a nation that has forsaken Him. Now, I do not believe that it would be even biblical to pray for God to bless America. Because what are we asking Him to bless? Now you can point to your Christian heritage all that you want to, but in 2015, America is no more Christian than Belgium is. And how are you going to sing, God bless this idol-worshiping, Bible-killing, creation-denying, evolution-loving, sodomite-marrying America? Huh? Every day it is getting harder and harder for me to be a patriot and a Christian. Now, when God's judgment comes, it comes in different forms. Sometimes God has judged a nation with catastrophic judgment. Natural disasters, tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis. Sometimes God has judged a nation by war and making them subject to other nations. I remember when I was a kid, they always preached against Russia and China. Huh? Chinese would come in the back door with bayonets in your hand, and you got to be a Christian, we're going to cut your throat. That's what they always preached when I was a kid. It hadn't happened. Huh? Sometimes God even wipes out civilizations. You haven't seen any Jebusites lately, have you? No Hivites lately, have you? God just wipes them out. Sometimes God will destroy a nation. Sometimes God will just let it collapse under the weight of its own sin. That's what happened to the Roman Empire. The judgment that is described in Romans chapter 1 is the judgment of abandonment. And what Paul describes is a society that God turns His back on, that God walks away from. They become so belligerent against God. They become so engrossed in their sin. They become so immoral, so perverse, so corrupt that God just abandons them to their sin. There'll always be a remnant. There will always be a witness, but the society and culture as a whole will just spiral and spiral all the way down till they reach hell and God wipes His hands of them. Judges chapter 10 and verse 13. Yet ye are forsaken me and served other gods. Wherefore I will deliver you no more. Go and cry unto the gods which you have chosen. Let them deliver you in the time of your tribulation. That's a scary thing, isn't it? Hosea chapter 4 and verse 17. This is what God said. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone. Let him alone. See, I believe that there is a point of no return. I believe that there is a place of abandonment. By the way, I believe individuals can come to this place. I believe that you can get to the place where God wipes His hands of you and the day of grace is over and you can reject the gospel and you can resist the Spirit and you can spurn the call of God to finally, God says, all right, I'll let you have your way. I will leave you alone. I have seen people so hardened to the gospel that I wondered if they could ever be saved. I believe that you can get to that place. I believe America is there. I believe that. You say, well, what about all those verses about revival? I don't discount at all what God can do. Anything that I say doesn't tie God's hands one time. Revival's not for a nation. Revival is for the church. And I know that God can send a great awakening, but outside of that, the only thing that is left is the judgment of God. And I believe that America is already experiencing judgment. Somebody says, well, you're making our children depressed. Hey, I'm not trying to make you depressed. Somebody can tell you the truth. Huh? Strong verse in Acts 14. Acts 14 and verse 16. Paul said, who in times past suffered all nations to walk in their own ways. You want to go that way? And God said, I'll let you go that way. Would you say that America is walking in her own ways? Oh, yes, she is. Yeah. I believe that He's turned this nation over to her own lusts. There's no restraint against the immoral, no restraint against the profane, and that is judgment. We're not waiting for judgment. Judgment is already here. Now look at verse number 24. Verse 24. I'll give you hope in a minute, all right? In verse 24. Wherefore God also gave them up. Now verse 26. For this cause God gave them up. In verse 28, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over. That phrase in the Greek language is used when they take a criminal that's been convicted and turn him over to the jailer or the executioner for punishment. The sentence has already been announced, and they gave him over for that judgment to be executed. And so God turns nations over to the effect of their sinful choices. There's a progression here, if you'll look in verse 24. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. The first indication that God has abandoned a nation is when that nation becomes obsessed with sexual immorality. Lust dominates the heart, and the body fulfills those lusts. That describes a pornographic, lewd, vulgar, illicit, immoral culture. That is America. Yes, sir. Now, all that you need to know that is go home tonight and turn your TV on. Okay? There's more sex, more adultery, more fornication, more softcore porn on your TV. Now, don't die on me, okay? All right? Nudity, sexual innuendos, dirty jokes, degrading to women, jokes about body parts, swapping partners, bachelor, bachelorette, dancing with the stars. It's on TV, it's on the internet, it's in the music, it's on silver screen. All of our culture, they are obsessed with living as immorally as they can, drinking iniquity like water. Sexual immorality, in verse 26, the next step is degrading passions. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use of that which is against nature. From immorality we go to perversions, vile affections, perverted affections, gross affections. And I don't care what anybody says, to any sane man, lesbianism, homosexuality, transgender is sick and twisted. It is unnatural affection, but it's also the icons of our culture. Bruce Jenner, man of the year, or would it be woman of the year? What would it be? Huh? Verse 28, the next step is depraved mind. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind. Lust of the heart, acts of the body, depravity of the mind. Reasoning becomes so corrupted that it is crippled and the conscience can no longer function. It is the place where a nation gets to where it cannot find its way to sanity because the mind is so corrupt. There is no logic, there is no reasoning, there is no understanding of truth. If you don't believe that, Saturday morning go out and knock on doors.
That's right.
Huh?
That's right.
Now when God turns a nation over to this, it is like opening the sewer lines of sin and it just floods the country because verse 29 down to verse number 32, that's the result of it. That's the defining mark in verse 29 to 32 that God has given them up, that God has given them over. If you will look at, tell you the one that really sticks out to me is in verse number 30, inventors of evil things. They come up with new ways to do evil. Come up with new ways to create sin. Hey, verse 29 to verse number 31, that's any day in Milton, Florida. That's it. It is a nation of immoral beasts that don't know any restraint, no conscience, no reason. You know who we celebrate? Michael Samms, the first openly gay NFL player. What a hero. Yeah. Ellen DeGeneres. Yeah. Rosie O'Donnell. Yeah. That's the icons of America. Yeah. So the question is not, will God judge America or when? No, it's no longer a question. It is our reality. And I tell you this morning that as a Christian, my allegiance is to God. And I say that America deserves everything that God gives it because they have turned their back on God. The evidence is before you. The country has kicked God out of the public school, out of every institution that they can, and God wipes her hands of her and says there's no restraint to your sin. It's not like it used to be. It keeps getting more and more perverse and more depraved. The Republicans are not going to save it. In verse number 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in righteousness. They don't want to hear it. They want to suppress it. Every attempt to silence truth. Here's what truth does. It activates the conscience. And it warns you there's judgment. There's consequences coming if you don't obey the truth. And Americans don't want to hear the truth, and they'll do absolutely everything they can to silence if you insist on speaking. You officially live in Sodom and Gomorrah. You live in a Marxist society is what you live in. This is where we're at when God abandons a nation. Now what is your response? What is your response? I'll give you two things this morning. Two things. Number one, engage the culture. If anything, the news of this week ought to make you bolder, more vocal, more adamant, more dogmatic, more forward. They don't want to hear the message, but it doesn't change our mandate. We are not to be rude. We're not to be arrogant. We are not hateful, but we are courageous. We are bold. We are outspoken. If all the people that you work with do not know that you're a Christian, you're part of the problem. If you purposefully stay out of the conversation when it comes up in the workplace because you don't want to be singled out, you're part of the problem. See, I can't preach to the Supreme Court. I can preach to you. I can preach to me. Now, what modern evangelicalism is going to say, well, we just need to tell people that we love them and that God loves them, and let's show the gay community the love of Jesus by accepting them, and we can't win them if we don't reject. Can you imagine John the Baptist affirming them? Can you imagine the Apostle Paul affirming them? So here's what I pray. Here's what I pray. And some of you are already mad at me. That's fine, all right? And every time you preach like this, it thins the crowd. And maybe that's why I don't know. Hey, I pray that what's happening in our nation will wake us up. I pray that it'll make you mad enough to get a handful of tracts and go pass it out. I pray it makes you bold enough to dare somebody to know that you are a Christian, to voice your opinion on the corruption of society and make you concerned enough about it to tell somebody the wonderful news of Jesus Christ. It is not a time for weak men to preach weak messages in weak churches to weak. It is a time for boldness and courage and standing and no retreat. That's what it's for. Engage the culture. You will not like the second one. Reject the culture. I'm working on a series of sermons on culture wars. It'll be a very uplifting, positive message. Hey, you know. The culture that you live in is godless and it's blasphemous. And you should be so sickened by it that you want nothing to do with it. If you're keeping up with the Kardashians, you're part of the problem. If you're TiVoing the next episode of The Bachelorette, you're part of the problem. If you're listening to Justin Bieber or Lady Gaga, or Taylor Swift, you're part of the problem. We want power. We want influence. We want to be salt in our community. Well, the only way is to divorce ourselves from this culture. Worldly minded, carnal living, pleasure-seeking Christians have never made one mark on this world. And the more that this nation slides towards Sodom, the more that I feel that I'm a stranger in this land. There is a strong pull in me that is telling me that I'm a citizen of another country. I don't belong here. I'm just passing through. I don't want to have anything to do with that culture. You'll have to engage it. And you'll have to reject it. You'll have to. I wish this morning that I could stand before the Supreme Court. I wish for one time I could preach to 9 black-robed men and women. And I thought this week that if I could preach for 1 minute to the Supreme Court, what verse would I use? I want you to go to Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22. I don't know if that phone means I'm supposed to be done, but I'm not done. Let me show you the verse. If I could preach to the Supreme Court, what verse would I use? And the verse I would use is Luke chapter 22 and verse 53. When I was daily with you in the temple, you stretched forth no hands against me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. They come to arrest Jesus in Gethsemane. And no doubt the old Pharisees thought they'd won. They're going to silence Jesus once and for all. And Jesus didn't fight back. He didn't say how unfair it is. He looked those old Pharisees in the face and he said, this is your hour and the power of darkness. Here's what he's saying. It's your turn. It's your hour. This is your time. You've got the upper hand. But enjoy it while you can. Because soon your hour will be over. And then it'll be my time. And I would say to this godless culture, your hour. You got your man in the White House. You got control of the courthouse. It's your hour. But there will come a time when the tables will be turned. So go ahead with your sexual perversions and live like dogs. This is your hour. Go ahead, gays and lesbians and transgender agenda. March in the streets and fly your rainbow flag. It's your hour. I hope it's not too tough for you. But go ahead, you abortionists. Kill your 4,000 babies a day. This is your hour. So go ahead, NOW and NAA and ACLU, and spew your liberal garbage about God and Christianity, because this is your hour. Go ahead, casinos, and rob the gullible and cause broken homes and bankruptcies and suicide and get fat off of the sins of others, because this is your hour. So go ahead, rappers and rockers, and poison the minds of our young people and send them to hell. This is your hour. I would say, go ahead, Hollywood. Show as much filth as you can put on the screen, because this is your hour. Go ahead, you pornographers. Get your harlots and parade them before the minds of our young men, because this is your hour. Go ahead, you liquor crowd. Sell your booze and put the bottle to your neighbor's lip and sell heartbreak by the drink and push your poison, because this is your hour. Go ahead, you religious crowd. Peddle your lies and take as many blind sinners to hell as you can. This is your hour. But I'm here to serve notice that your hour is almost over, and it will then be our turn. There will come a day when King Jesus will sit on his throne and every nation will bow before him. There will come a day when every government office will be filled by a born-again believer. There will come a day when righteousness will prevail. It's your hour. It's the power of darkness. But I've read the last chapter. There's coming a time when he will deceive the nations no more. So if you look out there, you're going to get discouraged. But if you look up there, it'll stir your heart. It'll make you want to be salt and light in this community. If you're not saved this morning, you better wake up to the fact that this world is going to hell and you are going along for the ride. I tell you this morning that you have picked a losing side, and the devil has lied to you, and he's going to laugh at you while you are in torments. Piano player calm. And you say, what did God ever do to me? I tell you what he did for you. He sent his son to die on the cross for your sins. And you ought to walk the aisle today. You ought to trust Christ, and you ought to switch sides. And if you're a carnal, worldly, weak Christian, you already know that you are. And the battle's heating up. And you're just going to be one more casualty. And if you won't be faithful when you have liberty, you sure won't be when the pressure comes. Now is the time to build some conviction in your soul. Now's the time to get in all the way and quit playing games. So why don't you come this morning and pray for your family? Why don't you come this morning and pray for your children? Why don't you come this morning and pray for your church? Pray for you. Pray for your country.